am I supposed to tell my husband when he does something that hurts me? If your husband is spiritually suffering, you know that there are wounds that he is dealing with, traumas in his history. He is spiritually lost. You are fully aware of this. I do not encourage you to tell him that. And the world doesn't like it when I say this, because where's the accountability? But here's what I want for you to understand. When you express to your spouse that he has hurt you, you are either consciously or subconsciously expecting him to do something about it. Why else would you tell him, right? If I'm telling you that you hurt me, I am expecting an apology. I am expecting change behavior. You're likely not going to get either one of those things, which means you have now put yourself in a vulnerable position to be moved by the enemy of your soul.
Boom. I thought that was an amazing, amazing, amazing response, because right now, accountability is the word, right? Everybody thinks it's their responsibility to hold someone else accountable, but nobody bothers to explain that timing is something you should consider as well. And this is what this queen is explaining, is that if you are aware of the state of mind, the emotional state of your partner, yet you have experienced them inflicting some type of wrong or hurt upon you, should you bring it to them in that time, during that time when they're having this experience? And the advice was no. Why? Because when you bring them your hurt or your perceived wrong, consciously or subconsciously, you're expecting them to do something about it, which is true. It doesn't matter what that thing is. So you being able to observe or knowing for a fact that your partner, in a sense, does not have the capacity or does not have enough room on their plate for what you're bogged down by, should you walk over and set it on their plate anyway? And she's saying no. And I agree with that. I agree with that 100%. Now, if it's something major that might disturb the flow of the relationship, like, infidelity or something like that, that might change the course of your union, I can see why you would have that conversation anyway, because you might be separating at that point. But if you're just talking about something that could have easily been a miscommunication or a misunderstanding of some sort, or just something that you may have overthought and you're processing negative thoughts about, it's not necessary that this has to be a right here and now conversation. Picking your battles is also a thing. Knowing when your partner is in a position to receive is a thing. Knowing when your partner is in a state to be mature about the conversation is a thing, because people get maxed out. That is a thing as well. Just because you're in a state of wanting to have a conversation, you're in a state of perceiving some type of wrongdoing, does not mean you should not also be proficient in perceiving whether or not this is a good time to have a conversation. This has nothing to do with accountability, because accountability is the part that they will play once they hear what is going on with you. We like to call it holding someone else accountable, but that is not your job. Your job is to be vulnerable. Your job is to be transparent. Your job is to be honest about your experience. Accountability will be had in their response within their course of action relating to what you have to say. And unfortunately, we don't talk about it enough in that way. So we feel it's our responsibility to tell someone this is how you're supposed to navigate this. But the truth is that in real life, no one tells you that sometimes when you have a need from your partner, in that same moment, they don't have it to give. And that's the part that makes relationships hard. Just because you need an apology now, you need clarity now, you need validation now, you need affirmation now, does not mean that they're not in a fog of anxiety and depression and stress. And it doesn't mean that because you need it now and you only need it from them, that their plate is completely free and clear to be able to give you what you need. What makes a relationship challenging is the fact that whether they're able to give you what you need in that moment or not, you still have something to get through. That's why you have to know how to regulate yourself as well. You can't just solely rely on your partner getting you through your dark places, because they have their own goings on as well. They have their own triggers and stress and confusion and overwhelm, and they have their own emotional processes as well. And just because you forge a relationship or a marriage does not mean they're working on your clock. Sometimes, and very often, at the very same time you're going through something, they're going through something as well. And we assume that they should automatically have the capability to push what is bothering them or overwhelming them to the side in order to cater to what you need. But in reality, what's going on with them will greatly affect how they handle what's going on with you. And if this is something you need to be handled with care, it would be adult and it would be very mature to say, well, he just got fired from his job. It might not be the best time to tell him that he forgot our anniversary. You see what I'm saying? I know this is an emotional thing for you, but could you imagine the load that is sitting on him now that he has the burden or the responsibility of taking care of his family with no income coming in? You can understand how he might not have been thinking about the anniversary. So it might be better for you to extend him that grace, mention it at a later date, hold on to it, but now may not be the time to add that to his plate and then judge him for his inability to navigate your hurt and what's going on with you, when you know for a fact he has something going on. And that's the key part of this discussion, is her saying, if you know he has all this going on, I wouldn't advise you to do that at that time. That doesn't mean hang on to it for the rest of your life. That means understand that adding to his plate will likely not serve you in this moment. And by telling him anyway, you are, in a sense, ignoring what he's going through, expecting him to ignore what he's going through to service you. And in some context, that is a little bit selfish. But there's a secondary opinion on here. So let's hear what this queen has to say.
And ladies, this is why we have to stop babying these men, because there is no way that a man, woman, or child can go into the streets, commit a crime, and be made to be held accountable. But when they walk through those doors, they are no longer held accountable for anything. That just doesn't make any sense. Spiritual grounding is not a luxury item. It is free. Prayer is free. Meditation is free. Getting yourself closer to God is free. It is not a luxury item. It is something that he has to invest into. And if he is not investing into it, that is not your problem, my dear. A man cannot be expected to be treated like a man, loved like a man, and respected like a man, but then not hold himself accountable as a man. And this is why, again, we have to stop babying these men. If they want that type of treatment, tell them to go to their mother. But if their mother is a good mother, they are still going to hold them accountable, because that is what mothering does. It is not disabling, it is empowering. You already know. If mommy and daddy didn't tell you, the first lady, Miss Yada, is here to tell you.
Okay. So the first thing that I will say is these are different perspectives. While I would say that my perspective is more aligned with the first queen as opposed to the second, it doesn't mean anybody is wrong. However, it's all relative to what outcome you would like to accomplish and what your priorities are. That would greatly affect going with the first perspective versus the second. Now, in this second perspective, the first thing I would say is the law holds people accountable for things that are destructive to society. When we're talking about a romantic relationship, many of the trials and tribulations that we experience are not related to affecting society as a whole. So comparing law's accountability to individually romantic situational, accountability, it's kind of no comparison to try and draw that comparison. But we have to understand that, again, holding someone else accountable is not our responsibility. A person should be well established in their discernment to hold themselves accountable. And this conversation, as far as the first queen, has almost nothing to do with accountability. The question was, should I tell him that he's hurt me? And the response was, if you are aware of some emotional instability or deficit on his part, or he's spiritually lost, the advice was no. Now, it wasn't a question as to whether or not you need to hold him accountable. It's like, do I tell him he's hurt me? She's saying, if you are aware of his suffering, if you're aware of his negative environment spiritually and mentally, the answer is no. Now, the second queen comes in almost to say that regardless, you should hold someone accountable. But here's the thing. When we think we can hold somebody accountable regardless of the contributing factors going on in the environment of the other person, we have to also hold ourselves accountable for the response that we may or may not have factored into or anticipate occurring, because these are really important contributing factors. Them being under a lot of stress, them suffering from anxiety or depression, them not taking, let's say they had medication to take and they haven't taken it yet, and this typically keeps them calm. You know what I mean? There are certain circumstances that you very well should be aware of before you deem yourself ready to hold somebody else accountable. That person, you at least should think that they're in a good space to be held accountable, because you can't control their response. You can't control whether they get defensive. You can't control whether they get angry. You can't control whether they are accountable. And with that being true, if you know for a fact that you need some validation, you need some healing, you need some clarity in this moment, observing somebody in a place where they look like they're not in a position to be able to do so, and then adding something to their plate would be irresponsible. It's not about holding someone accountable. And then when you get to praying and meditation, all of these things are ways to center yourself and gain back your alignment. Those are areas of practice that one needs to pursue. As she stated, you have to pour yourself into. Most people do not have a regular area of exhausting and expelling that energy from their body. Most people push it down. Most people act like it isn't there. Most people explain it away, in one shape, form, or fashion. So to be realistic in a relationship, most people do not have those practices, even if they say they do. I like to meditate. I tend to pray. You rarely actually run into a person that has these practices on a daily basis, a couple hours a day, in order to keep themselves in a very positive headspace. And with that being the case, that means that their emotions may be fluctuating. They're having trouble regulating themselves. And these are things you should know about your partner. It shouldn't just be full-fledged, this is who I am. I like to hold people accountable. Because when you disregard their state of being, their state of mind, their emotional state, you disregard your own experience, because you assuming that they are prepared to handle what you're going to put on their plate, despite what you can visually verify that they are going through. You might as well say, I don't care about getting an actual response. I don't care about having a real conversation. I'm open to having a full-blown escalating argument. You see what I'm saying? You have to be more intentional with your approach. And I'm not saying walk on eggshells. I'm saying be considerate. I'm saying not just considerate of them, but considerate of yourself. Because if you know for a fact that your husband just lost his job and you're focused, you're reeling about the fact that he forgot your anniversary and you desperately want to tell him he forgot your anniversary, for you, this is what the biggest trouble that's going on in your mind. For your husband, his biggest trouble is paying the rent next month. And you may deem that something completely important that needs to be discussed right now. And even though you know that he has just lost his job and he has not come to you with a clear plan of execution to solve this situation, you know that there's a possibility he may not handle that interaction well. Because when you compare the two, the rent is definitely the most important. And so it may come off like you're self-serving and selfish to try and hold him accountable for forgetting and not apologizing and not taking the initiative to do something special. That should come before making sure you have a roof over your head. You see what I'm saying? Sometimes we have emotional things that bother us and we will disregard the experience of our partner because we are having an emotional experience. But in order for you to be able to have a peaceful and a harmonic conversation with another individual, they have to be in a place of peace as well. And sometimes, majority of the time, the thing that we're so emotionally bogged down by is really not that big of a deal. It's actually something that you can get over on your own, but we get so overly attached to our partner that we make it their problem to resolve. But if we stayed in that independency that we brag on so much, we would get through it and our partner would never know that it was ever a major issue, and you would leave them to get themselves back in order instead of looking at you now as an enemy instead of someone that they feel should have their back in a very dark time. Sometimes you prioritize yourself and it works against you if you're not careful, because now your partner feels like you're not on their side. You're just something else trying to attack them. And if you don't make this observation and your focus is holding them accountable above all else, you can actually ruin your relationship if you're lacking the ability to use discernment. And if they don't have regular prayer practices or regular meditation practices, if you believe in that, that's something you can introduce them to and practice with them to help them center themselves, also aiding yourself to get closer to having a positive conversation. Now, again, I don't think these other two perspectives are necessarily wrong. But I think that they have pros and cons. And I think that the first one in particular is more of a beneficial resolve when you're thinking about the whole aspect of the relationship instead of this one moment in time. In the moment, it feels like it's going to make or break the relationship, but in reality, it's just a moment by comparison to the entire longevity of the relationship. And if you prioritize holding someone accountable like the second queen, you may end up fumbling the relationship because you prioritized someone over you prioritize your own concern over your partner's mental, emotional, or physical well-being, and that experience by itself can cause the relationship to crumble. See, we're losing focus with whether or not it is our responsibility to hold other adults accountable. Whether you hold them accountable or not, repercussions for their actions will take place, thus creating the experience of accountability. It is not a responsibility that you need to hold, and you need to make sure that you create a moment for you to be responsible bestowing upon them. Sometimes you just need to let things play out so they can be accountable on their own. And if you chose a good person, like I'm sure you're confident that you have, you won't have to worry about whether or not they're accountable or you need to hold them accountable. When they realize and the light bulb goes off that they've missed that anniversary, they'll come talk to you on their own without you having to draw attention to it to get what you need. Prioritizing yourself is not always the best way to handle a concern in a relationship. Sometimes looking out for them does more than looking out for yourself. Peace.